So version 11, for those of you internally that have been involved in version 11, we changed the schedule a little bit. Version 11 was originally going to be a public release. Okay, we've changed that to what we're calling a limited release, primarily because there are some additional things that we want to get in the product to meet some customer requirements by the January timeframe. And so we based on the schedule, we didn't want to do a full release in October and turn around and do another full release in January 3 months later. Okay, so the burden that puts on customers, the burden it places on our support team, and just launching 2 different releases within that time period just didn't make any sense. So we are offering version 11 by request only. So there are some customers that already have 11. Anybody else that wants it needs to go through a request, and that request can be made through me. And we'll look at whether it makes sense. One of the reasons that that we are doing a limited release is we want to control, again, to minimize the burden on the support team and the services team. We want to minimize the number of people that have 11 right prior to 11.1. When 11.1 comes out, that'll be a full release. Okay, so 11.1 will include everything in 11 plus a couple of new things, and all of that will be bundled together into the 11.1 release. And the target for that right now is January. Okay. Then we will get into our version 12 release, which was our major planned release for version 12 for 2012. Oh, Garrett, how you doing?
Oh, sorry, I'm late.
All right, and then so that version 12 release will have one of our big story items for 2012, which is historical benchmarking. We're doing a lot of really cool things with looking at historical data and leveraging that for the purposes of validating estimates, benchmarking estimates. So that at a very high level will be what's coming in version 12, along with a bunch of other things. Okay, so today we're going to focus on what's in version 11. And like I said, let's go through them at a bullet point level to start with, just so you can kind of see. I just picked the top 12 new enhancements in this release, so we'll go through each one of them. The bigger ones are at the start. So once we start going through the system, we'll probably spend more than half our time on the first 3 or 4 things, and then they'll get smaller as we go. So don't get worried if it looks like we're not going to be on schedule as we're going through this. Okay? All right, so the first thing on the list, break cost item quantities into periods. What really drove this was we're getting into more and more customers and opportunities that are involved in long-term projects. Okay, so whether that's in particularly focused in the mining sector, but also in some of the large capital projects, large bridge projects. I mean, we're seeing projects that are 3, 4, 6 years in duration. In some of the mining projects, they're looking at kind of a life of mine scope where we're talking about 30, 40 years in some cases for these projects. Okay, so the issue there was when we're looking at a cost item, whether it's a shaft or a drift or a bridge or whatever it is, rather than having to break that out into what are we doing in year 1, what are we doing in year 2, what are we doing in year 3, which adds to the CBS structure, makes the structure much larger. What we've done now is we've created the ability to take a single cost item. Any cost item can now have multiple quantities by period. Okay, so a single shaft that's going to be developed over 10 years, you don't have to have 10 cost items for that. You can have one cost item because it's going to have the same crew, same production rate probably, right? But we can break that into what's the quantity we're going to do in year 1, year 2, year 3, or month 1, month 2, month 3, or even day 1, day 2. Okay, so you can break you can define what the periods are. Periods could be days, weeks, months, quarters, years. Okay, so you could look, and I believe I'll look at Garrett here at Freeport, but I believe there's at least some cases where, we're going to look at a 40-year project by the month, right? So we're going to have 480 periods to look at. Okay, so it gets pretty complex, and you'll see as we get into it, there's a lot of math going on as we roll that into looking at production over time and cash flow and things like that. Okay, so that's really the first one there is the first major item in version 11. The second one is the first part of what we're doing with dependent cost items. Dependent cost items are those things where we're setting up costs that are a function of something else, typically overhead items, indirect items, things like that. And we've been really creating a model for those things over the last couple of years and developing a spec for that. And so now you're seeing some major changes. There'll be major changes in this version and then also in 11.1 around these dependent cost items. So you'll see there's a lot more flexibility there now for those things in terms of how do we calculate those dependent costs, how do they get categorized when we're done with them, where do they go, what are they called. And so we really opened those up much more than sort of the predefined dependent cost items that we used to have. Excel linking and embedding, there's a lot of changes we've made in there, a couple things that just have to do with being able to manage the links better. We have customers that have been hundreds or thousands of links, and so we've made it easier to manage those links and find them and see them, as well as some new options for when you're copying items that have been linked to Excel, when you're copying those from one item to another or one job to another, to maintain those links so they don't get broken. Rate estimate and proposal reports based on billing rates. This is something that, again, is a reflection of our evolving customer base. We have a lot of customers now that are producing T&M-based proposals, time and material type proposals, professional services type proposals. And so what we need to do is be able to create estimates and proposals based on our outside billing rates for resources. If we have labor, we have equipment, we have materials, we can specify our own costs for those things and then also an outside billing rate. Okay? And that then gives us, with this reporting capability, we can now generate a proposal to a customer that uses those billing rates rather than our internal cost rates. Okay, those are the first four. Before we jump to the next section, again, we're going to come back around the horn and go through each one of these things in more detail. But any questions on those four in terms of what they are at this point? All right, let's go to the next group here. Custom cost curves. This is something that, again, gets back to looking at the time aspect of costs. In the current, or in version 10.3, I should say, we had 4 different cost curves, but they're predefined: linear, front-loaded, back-loaded, and bell-shaped. Okay, and these cost curves, just as a refresher, are for taking the cost of an item and spreading it over the duration that's defined by its start and finish date. So if you've got something that's going to go from January to March, do we want to spread that equally January, February, March? Do we want to have most of it in January or most of it in March, or ramp up and then ramp down, right? So those were the choices previously. Now you can create your own custom cost curves. Okay, so we could put 30% of that in January and 50% of it in February and 20% in March if we wanted to. Okay, so you can have as many periods as you want in that cost curve and spread the costs over time really any way you want. Okay. This next one, number 6, is something that we've gotten a lot of requests for, and that's on our cash flow graph. We've had for some time now the ability to graph estimated or forecast values. Now we can overlay those with actual values. So for customers that are using our project control system and job tracking, as we're recording quantities completed and actual costs, we're going to be able to graph those against the original plan so you can see how you're doing against the plan. We have a new integration with InfoMine, number 7 here. InfoMine is a data source. It is similar to RS Means or Richardson's. but it's focused in the mining sector. It's a third-party cost repository, if you will. And what we can do with that now is we can link into that on a live basis. So if you have an InfoMine subscription, you can pop out into InfoMine, choose a fleet of equipment, go in and pick a bunch of different machines that you want to use in your estimate, and instantly bring those machines into hard dollar along with all of their rates. So InfoMine is maintaining what they think is the operating and ownership costs of hundreds of different mining machines. Okay, so if you don't have a good history of what those machines should cost you, you can go out into InfoMine, pick the machines you're going to need, and the cost is already going to be there. You'll be ready to go. Number 8, control the master CBS. So this is the ability to decide what from the master CBS comes into each new project automatically. Previously, anything you put in the master CBS, including our predefined dependent cost items, I'm sure everybody has noticed when you create a new project, all of those things come into that new project, and the ones that you don't want, then you need to go delete. Okay, so we've added a nice little option in there where you can now check an auto include box next to each of the things that you do want to come into to every new job automatically. And the others will be there for reference. You can copy them in if you want, but you can choose which ones come in automatically. Any questions on any of those before we go to the next set?
On the master CBS, do those become like job templates that you can?
Yeah, so the question is, on the master CBS, do those things become job templates? And the answer is, with this new enhancement, you can use the master CBS more as a template than previously, right? Because previously, if you try to use it as a template, anything you put in there, all of it comes into the new job, right? Well, now you can go in and set up standard items in there, maybe for particular types of work, right? So they're there kind of as a library that you can go grab them when you want them, for a project, filter on them, find the ones you want, right? But you're not going to have all of them coming into every job automatically then. So it does facilitate the use of that more as a template. Any other questions?
You're probably going to get into this when you do the product demonstration part, but I'm curious to know what's the realm of the actual values that we're going to overlay on the cash flow? Is it cost and revenue and resource utilization?
It is cost and resource utilization. So we're not graphing actual revenue at this point, but we are graphing actual cost and actual resource utilization.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on those? All right. The last 4 that we will discuss more options to filter out non-utilized resources. There's a number of things that we did here, and this is just sort of typical kind of maintenance type things where we're just updating and enhancing existing functionality. But there are a few different places where when you're going in and looking at your resource utilization, you're seeing all resources, whether they're utilized in the project or not. Right, so it's for reporting, for visibility into what's used in the project. Now you've got more options now where we can say, hey, show me just the things that are utilized in this project, filter out the ones that are not. Number 10, see who's working in the current project. This is something that we've had as a plugin for a while. We put it into the core product now. So if you're working in a network mode, in a collaborative mode, you can click a button and see who else is working in this same project. Okay, so if you want to see who is in that same project that you're working in, it's now just a click away to see that. Number 11 is manual schedule option. Okay, previously, if you wanted to use schedules, which also are required if you want to do cash flow, the prerequisite for any of that was you needed to develop the timing of the project in Microsoft Project or Primavera. Okay, now we have a manual schedule option where you can go in and develop the schedule, as the name implies, manually. You can go in and just pick start and finish dates for all the different items in the project. This also ties back to the period quantities. You'll see when we import period quantities. Remember we talked about maybe it's a 40-year job with we want to bring in quantities by month. Okay, that essentially defines the schedule for us if we do that, because we know how much work is going to happen in each period, right? So we can drive the schedule from that. It's a manual schedule because we're not using Project or Primavera, but it's really developed automatically in that case from the period quantities. So a lot more options now on scheduling. Everybody I think has run into opportunities, especially on the owner-operator side, where hey, we're not building a detailed CPM schedule maybe like a contractor would, but we do want to get in and put in some high-level dates by month or by quarter, right, to give us a high-level schedule. So now they can do that very easily without having to go out and use Microsoft Project or Primavera. And number 12, we do support Primavera version 8 now. Okay, so we've had questions about, almost as soon as version 8 came out, Oracle surprised everybody with Primavera 8.1. I think it was literally 30 days later or 60 days later, but right after 8.1. So, or right after 8.1 came out. So we currently do support version 8. Official support for version 8.1 will come in our 11.1 release. Okay, so right now we support 8. In a few more months, we will officially support 8.1 of Primavera. Any questions on any of those before we jump into the details? Going, gone? All right. So let's jump into these in more detail now. Let's start with the first one, break cost item quantities into periods. Okay, and as you can see here, as we talked about, our periods can be day, week, month, etc. We can break cost items into as many periods as we want, either by a quantity or by a percentage. And we can also import those quantities by period now with some new import from Excel options that we've added. Okay, so let's go take a look at that. All right, hopefully everybody's still seeing my screen okay remotely. If not, just yell. I'm going to go into basically a blank project we're going to start with. And you're going to have to bear with me. Everything seems to be running a little bit slower after I started our GoToMeeting thing here. It seems to be kind of taking the resources on my machine, but hopefully we'll be able to get through it. Yikes. This is really slow. All right, so I'm going to go into the CBS for this project. And what we're going to do is we're going to import from an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so we've got a couple of different Excel spreadsheets. So as you look at this project in the CBS, there's nothing in here right now, no items, no quantities, no costs. In fact, let me go to a view that will give us some of the columns I want to look at, including our quantity and some cost columns. Okay, so the scenario here that I'm going to take you through is we have a spreadsheet that has a whole bunch of items with a whole bunch of quantities, and those quantities are broken down by period. And there's two different formats. If you look at our data source import from Excel, we have two new options in here, period quantity columns and roll-up quantities. And these are going to, you're going to pick the right one that fits the layout of the spreadsheet that you're trying to import. So let's take a look at some of those spreadsheets. I'm just going to launch Excel and show you those two different formats of spreadsheet. So typically this, the spreadsheets we're going to look at are, these are typically coming from a takeoff process or a design process. Okay, so if I go and let's open up this one here. This will be a good example of the first one we're gonna import. So here's a spreadsheet. This is an actual real-world example, and if you look as we scroll across, we're going to see basically each row in here is essentially a cost item. As you look at the description, you can kind of get a feeling for what it is. This is a mining example. And as I scroll over to the right, you're going to start to see to the right, there's a total quantity, but now we've also got that broken down by, in this case, by year. Okay, so in this spreadsheet, somebody in advance of creating this spreadsheet used probably in this case, a mine design tool to figure out, okay, that particular item right there, which is 7,200 meters, when are we doing that, and how much, what's the total quantity in each year? Okay, so we can see that one starts in 2012. As I scroll out, looks like it finishes in 2016. We can see how those meters are broken out by period. Okay, so when we bring that into hard dollar, it's going to be the same crew, same approach to all of those quantities, but we do want to be able to know and report and graph, what are our costs going to be by period. So this new enhancement allows us to bring in those quantities by those periods. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll close that. And we'll go ahead now and go back into hard dollar. So what we're going to do is we're going to import that spreadsheet. So I'm going to go into import update. Okay, so look at our two choices here, period quantity columns or roll-up quantities. Okay, you can probably guess based on the fact that that spreadsheet had quantities in columns that this is the one we want to use. Okay, so we're going to use this particular approach, and you'll see why here in just a minute when we define the mapping. Okay, so I've already mapped to this, but I'll take you through how we can do it. So I've mapped to that same spreadsheet, that EPS by AFE. Notice you can also map to the column header. So where does the column header start and where does it end? Okay, so if you have multiple row column headers spread across maybe 2, 3, 4 different rows, now we can define where does the column headers start and where do they end. Okay, and then we can also go in here and define the mapping now. Okay, so this is going to allow us to go in and map our fields to the fields that we want in hard dollar. Okay, now one thing that we need to do actually, and let me back out here for just a second, one thing that I forgot to mention, if we're going to be bringing in quantities by period, we need to define what the periods are, right? We need to know, are they years, are they months? Okay, so I'm going to do that through job properties. Okay, so now that I've seen my spreadsheet and I know that the quantities are going to be coming in by year, I'm going to job properties, I'm going to go to cash flow, which is really where all of the settings exist that have to do with the timing of the project. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and say, in my case, my period setting for cash flow is year. Okay, that way when we bring in those quantities from Excel, we'll know that each column there represents a year. Okay, now let's go ahead and import. So let's back to the period quantity columns, define our mapping. Okay, so I'm just going to map, the hard dollar fields on the left to the fields on the right that are coming from that Excel spreadsheet. Okay, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I've mapped my description to a column in the spreadsheet called AFE description. I don't need to map the quantity because the quantities are going to come out of all those individual columns. Okay, so I'm going to leave that blank for now. I do want to map there is a column in there for units, which is going to give me my meters or whatever the units are. And then I'm also going to map a code. I want to bring in this code. There's a column in the spreadsheet called full code that I want to be able to reference after the data comes into hard dollar. So I can map all those things into, in this case, a user-defined field. I'm going to map that Excel value called full code to a field in hard dollar called full code. That's just a user-defined tag field. Now we get to the good stuff. In the schedule setup, this is where we can define where do those period quantity columns start and where do they finish? You remember our spreadsheet, there was, as I scrolled out to the right, we finally got to some columns where the years were, right? So this is where I can go in and map. You know, here's all my Excel column headers, and I can map if I want to start in 2008. I could start, you know, if we wanted to start in 2011 or 2012, we could do that. Okay, but I'll start with 2008, which is the earliest one, and 2004, which is the latest one. Okay, so that's going to bring all of those quantities into hard dollar that it finds within that range of columns. Does that make sense so far? Okay, and that's all I'm going to map to. I don't need to map production or resources because that's not in the spreadsheet. I'm just mapping. I just want to bring in my items and quantities. Okay. Down below, I'm going to check this box, create missing tags, create missing units of measure, and those are validated fields. But if I have those boxes checked, if there's something new that comes in through the import process, it'll just add them in there automatically as opposed to stopping the process and telling me I've got invalid data. All right, so that's our mapping. Now we're going to go ahead and do the import. Okay, so this is looking at that spreadsheet, creating the items, and setting up those period quantities for all those different items. Okay, so we see that they've all come in. There's a bunch of items in here now. Now, obviously, we could take those items and group them into a CBS structure, and right now we've got just a flat list, right? But we've got them in here. We've got our quantities. You see the total quantity came in. Okay, now let's go look at, where do we see those period quantities? If I go into that one item, in my cost item setup tab, this is where you've now got a new option, period quantities. Okay, so we can go in here. Notice when we imported that period quantity breakdown from the spreadsheet, it automatically checked this box for us. And if I go look at those quantities, you can see what it did here in hard dollar. It brought in each period that was relevant to this one particular item here. Okay, and it brought in the quantities, in this case for 2012 through 2016, okay, just like the spreadsheet. Okay, we're going to come back a little bit later and talk about how we can manually edit this spread right in hard dollar if we want to. Okay, so at this point, these values are open. Okay, if you look down below, there's our total quantity. That's the exact same total quantity that if you were to go look in the spreadsheet, we'd see it, and it's 100%. Okay, but we could re-divvy up that spread right in here if we wanted to, without going back to the Excel spreadsheet. All right, now let's take a look at what we can do with that. Now that we have those periods defined, let's put. I'm going to highlight all of these items except for the job row, and let's just put a crew on here so we can get some costs in here. So when we go to cash flow, we'll have some things to look at. Okay, I'm going to take this crew right here, which has a couple of things in it. It's got a labor resource in it, and then it's got a unit quantity-driven resource in it, so we can track our quantities. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and employ that crew, that assembly, to all of these items, okay, and I'm going to open that up and put a production rate in. Now, obviously, in the real world, you're going to go estimate these items, obviously much more detailed than what I'm about to do, but just so we get some cost in here, I'm going to come into production, go to my man hours per unit. Now it's showing the word varies in here because all of those items I selected, some of them have different units of measure. Right? Most of them are per the meter, okay, but there's a few in there that are lump sum. I'm just going to say we'll put 5 man hours per unit. Okay, so when I click OK now if you look over to the right, we see costs in here because we now have resources employed. We have a production rate, which tells us how long those resources need to work. Okay, so now we've got total costs. If you look down at the bottom right, it's about $12 million. Okay, this is where this period quantity enhancement really kicks in, though, because previously you would have to, if you wanted to look at this over time, remember this first item that was, what was it, 2012 through 2016, 5 or 6 different periods. Previously, we would have had to break that into 5 subordinate items and schedule each one of those in order to spread that cost over time. Okay. Now I can skip the scheduling process altogether because my period quantities have already defined the timing. Right, so I can go right into cash flow at this point. Okay. And I've already got a cost curve on that. I didn't have to do any kind of a schedule, right, so I can see how those costs build up over time based on those quantities in each period for every single item. And if I go into my settings, right, we're looking at it by year, which it's set for me automatically because that's how we set it up. We'll come back to some of the new options on this cash flow graph to look at actuals. And right now we're just graphing the expected cost, the forecast cost. And let's graph our resource utilization as well and our production units. So let's make this blue, and we'll graph those as bars. Okay, so I'm just going to graph our resource utilization now so we can look at our miner hours and our production units, and we'll just graph this in units. Okay, so again, just by merely importing that Excel spreadsheet with all those quantities, I can see the red line is my cost over time. The gray bar, now that I've put some crews and resources on these items, I can see my hours for these labor resources. Okay, and this is by year. Okay, so if we look at, again, depending on your screen resolution, you can see here, mine's, we can see bars by year. There's 2010, 2012, 2011 in the middle. Because I'm on a small screen, we don't graph every single, we don't put a label on every one of them. Okay, but the gray box is my hours for the miner, the blue box is my production unit. So my meters that I'm accomplishing in each year are graphed based on that blue bar. Okay, any questions on that? Anybody, that makes sense what we're doing there? Okay, so for people that are that are going through a design process to give you quantities by period, we can now skip the whole scheduling process altogether. We don't need to go out to Microsoft Project or Primavera. As you saw, just right out of the box we can get a graph like this. Okay, let me show you the other spreadsheet format. We won't repeat the whole process. Okay, but if we look at another type of spreadsheet, just so you know what the other version is for. This spreadsheet now is ultimately it has the same type of information. It's going to tell us quantities by period, but in this case it's organized differently. As I look at this spreadsheet, I can see there's a start and a finish column in here. Okay, so there's no remember the other one had, different columns going all the way across for every period. This just has two columns, and there's a date range in here that defines, that quantity. If we look at this item, as we scroll over to the right, you're going to see a quantity there, total meters, 8.5. Well, what that's really telling us is we're planning on doing 8.5 meters in this time period, okay, from August 10th to August 11th. Now, what's unique about this type of a spreadsheet is, if you look, there's probably a column in here that tells me a lot of these items are really the same thing. They're just happening at different times with different quantities. Okay, so this other spreadsheet format that we can import allows you to choose what column really identifies the item itself. So we're going to have to do a roll-up. And if you look down here at, say, this DD10W, okay, between September 27th to 28th, we've got a quantity off to the right. But down below, there's more DD10Ws, right? So here's some in October. Here's some more later in October. DD10W down at the bottom in late October, all the way into November. Okay, so when we bring this stuff into hard dollar, we don't want 27 different DD10Ws. We want one, because it's going to be the same crew, same production, that kind of stuff. Okay, so our other format allows you to that other import format allows you to specify how do we want to roll things up. So if we rolled up based on this column, it's going to create one line item in hard dollar for all the 16 W's and all the 13 W's. Okay, so we might have 1,000 items in the spreadsheet. We may end up with 50 items in hard dollar. Okay? And our period quantities are going to be defined by these date ranges. Okay, so you've got the flexibility now to deal with, as these spreadsheets come along, our customers have the ability to deal with them and map to them, even if they're in completely different formats. Okay, so if we, again, I won't go through the whole process, but if we come out now and let's delete all of that and kind of start over. If I go to import from Excel with roll-up quantities, I'm going to get a little bit different format. Okay, let's pick that other file. Oh, had it already. Okay, so in here now, if we go into schedule setup, for example, now instead of those period quantity columns that we're going to map to, now there's a single start date that we need to find the Excel column that represents the start date, and we need to find the Excel column that represents the finish date. And then you've also got these roll-up field choices. Okay, so if we rolled up by V object. If we go back to the spreadsheet, this is that V object column. That's what I was describing. We roll up by that. We're going to get, anything that has the same label on it is going to all roll into one item in hard dollar. And you can use multiple columns to do that roll up. So maybe maybe this column here is not unique, but this column and this column together do make a unique code. So that allows you to pick multiple columns and say the combination of those two columns together indicates a unique item. Okay, so previously you would have had to go into the spreadsheet and do some joins and concatenates and create one column that has that field in it. Right now you can just map to as many columns as you need to do the roll-up. Okay, so the rest of it's the same. I mean, once we import the spreadsheet, then we can proceed to do everything we just did. We go right into the cash flow, skip the whole scheduling process. Okay, makes sense? Any questions on that? Good. You guys are awfully quiet.
Awfully good.
All right, well, let's go to our next item on the list. All right, more flexibility for dependent cost items. So this is something I know a lot of folks have been clamoring for, and I'm excited to finally get it out here. This is something we've been working on for a while. And like I said, there's really two stages to this. The first bit of it is in this release, and the next bit will be in 11.1. So when we do the public release of 11.1, all of that will be in there. Okay? But we'll take you through the first bit right now. Okay, so first and foremost, easily change descriptions for all of the items. Okay, sounds like a simple thing, but those of you that have been using hard dollar have it's probably our most asked question. Why can't I change the titles of those dependent cost items? Right, you've got to go into the view menu and customize, and right, it's like a 27-step process, right, to change the titles. So what we've done now is, you can go right into those items, change the descriptions just like you can for a non-dependent item. Okay, so in terms of putting the descriptions in there, dependent items and non-dependent items are now the same. Add as many of them as you want. Okay, this is probably the second most frequently requested thing that we've had. Okay, in the 10.3 release, you got predefined dependent cost items. They are what they are. You can have as many as you want as long as there are the number that we give you. Okay? In 11, you can have as many as you want with no caveat. Okay, so you can have as many dependent cost items as you want. No limit on that. There are some new types of dependent cost items. Okay, so we can now do dependent cost items and model costs that are going to be add-ons to man hours and equipment hours. Previously in the 10.3 release, your add-ons had to be based on some type of cost. All right, let's take all of our labor cost and do an add-on based on that. Let's take all of our equipment cost and a certain number of items and do an add-on on that. Okay, now we can do add-ons based on man hours. Give me all the man hours and add $10 a man hour as a contingency or something like that. Okay. In the 11.1 release, by the way, you'll have the ability to also do those dependencies and those add-ons based on individual resource hours. Okay, so we could do an add-on based on my dozer hours or based on my excavator hours or my carpenter hours. Okay, not just total man hours and equipment hours. And then lastly here, we can categorize the cost of a dependent cost item however you want. Okay, the scenario there, in the previous version in 10.3, let's say we were doing an add-on for small tools and supplies. Right, so we wanted to just take all of our labor costs and let's add 5% to get the cost in there to cover all of our miscellaneous small tools and stuff. Okay, well, previously that resulting cost had to be categorized as labor because it was based on labor. Okay, now you can, even though it's based on labor, you can take that resulting cost and categorize it as a material or a supply or a miscellaneous. Okay, there's no fixed rules as far as that goes. Okay, so let's go take a look at that. I'm going to go into the training job, and this will give me a chance to talk about a rule that we need to be careful about as we're training on this and talking about it with customers. In order to preserve the way that the previous system worked with our predefined dependent cost items, we didn't want to take those away because we knew we'd be getting phone calls about that. So the existing predefined dependent cost items are still there, and if you like the way they work and you want to keep using them, have at it. There's nothing that will stop you from doing that. They'll work just like they always did. Okay, with one exception. Okay, these are the predefined ones that we've always had. You can see all of them are in our training job. Okay, so if you want to keep using those, it's fine. At least now you can go ahead and change the descriptions. Okay, so if I wanted to change that to a contingency, I can change that description right there in the CBS. If I wanted to move that contingency up, put it up higher, I can move it up. Okay, so even with the existing predefined ones, you have those two enhancements that you can take advantage of. Okay, but the rule here is you cannot mix and match predefined ones with custom ones. Okay, and there's a lot of reasons for that in terms of how the math works and the fact that you can get into circular calculations if we allow you to mix and match them together and still preserve the old predefined rules. Okay, so you have to choose. Am I going to use the old ones? Am I going to use the new ones? If I come up here, I've got some predefined ones in here, and I go to Edit, Insert Dependent Cost Item, new menu choice, right? I go into that menu choice and try to add something in here, let's say a dependency based on direct cost. I'm going to get a operation prohibited. You cannot add one that has a predefined cost items already. We've already got these predefined ones in the job. Okay, so if I want to put some custom ones in, I've got to delete these guys. Okay.
Hey, Brad, I see you changed some of those names, or you have the ability of changing the names of those dependent cost items. Is that a per job setting, or does that push across your system?
That is per job. You can change them in the master CBS, right? So they'll come in that way in every job. Okay. Yeah, but if you change it, once it's here in the job, if I change it, it's changing it for just that job.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So let's delete all these. Let's delete all these, and so we can have the ability to add the new custom ones. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight those, delete them. Okay, so I'm going to go up into Edit, Insert Dependent Cost Item. Okay, and now I can choose any of these types of dependent costs to add into the project. Okay, so each of these have different settings associated with them. Okay, in terms of, do I want a dependency based on the job's price? Do I want it based on the job's finance cost? right, based on our cash flow. Do I want it based on bond table rates, direct costs, indirect costs? Here's the new ones, man hours and equipment hours. Okay, let's just do a direct cost add-on to start with. So I'll choose that one. It's going to create that thing for me at the top. Okay, and again, I can change the title of this. Okay, maybe we want to make this a risk contingency. Okay, so I can change that title right there. If I drill into that, okay, you're going to see a familiar-looking breakdown now, but there's a new tab right here called cost categorization. Okay, so we call this risk contingency. We could go in now and say maybe we want to have an add-on for bridge materials. Okay, so maybe we think there's a lot of risk associated with that, so we want to go over and define a dependency here so we can say, let's go in and get, I've set up a little view here that brings over this tag where in the training job we've categorized our items based on the work type. Okay, so I want a dependency here that's maybe not based on all the costs in the job. I want it based on just the items that are bridge related. Okay, or I could do a custom filter and choose maybe one bridge and guardrail, right? Any combination of these things. Okay, so if I just choose bridge, okay, now the dependency is going to be based on all the costs in the bridge items. Okay, now I can go over and, so that cost is $375,000. Now I can go over and put in a percentage on top of that. Let's say it's, again, it's on materials. We want a 5% add-on. Okay, so I've just created an add-on based on all of my bridge costs, then narrowed that down to just the materials part, and I put a 5% add-on on top of that. Okay, so I've got $4,600 in there. Right now, I've got a model. Right, so if my estimate changes and our bridge costs go up, as long as some of those materials were affected, then my add-on for bridge materials is going to go up or down accordingly. Now, what I can do now is, this add-on, maybe I want to, since it's a risk-related thing, I don't want to count it as materials. Maybe I want to count it as an allowance. Okay, so this is where that cost categorization tab comes in. If I click on that, I've got two options. Okay, so I want to use the default categorization. Look what it did. It put it in materials. Why did it do that? Trick question.
Because you based it on
good answer. Because I based it on materials, just like in the predefined ones. Since I based that add-on materials, it put it in the material category. Okay, but I don't want it in the material category. I want to go to custom categorization, and I want to put it in allowance. Okay, so I just check the box. Okay, I could go down to the detailed cost categories underneath allowance. So maybe I want to put it in specifically in that risk allowance category right there. Okay, you got to put it in one category. If you're going to use a custom categorization, you can't spread it. Okay, but you can choose what single category do we want to put that in. Does that make sense why we're doing that? In this case, we're calculating a risk number, right, for this contingency, and we want that cost separate from our material cost. We don't want it getting mixed in there, so we're putting that in a separate category. Okay, now the other thing you can do is, if I wanted another contingency, maybe that's based on a different type of item, different set of items, maybe I have another contingency that is based on all items. Okay? In the past, you could not do that because you can only have one of these, and the dependency is the same all the way down. What we can do now is we can go create another one. So I can go to Edit, Insert Dependent Cost Item. We'll do another direct cost add-on. Okay, it puts it right up there at the top. And maybe this one now is risk contingency bridge. This one is going to be a general risk contingency. Okay, so when I open that one up, now I can just use the default dependency, which is all items. So I don't need to define any filters here. Okay. And this can be our general contingency. And this could be in your master CBS, right? You could set up a standard add-on or contingency number that you want to have in there for, maybe it's 10% on top of everything. Okay, so as a starting point, as a default, this item could come into every new job, general contingency at 10%. It's already there. We can always go change it if we need to. Okay, so now I've got two contingency items in there. One just on the bridge items, and then one that's on all the items. You can see their totals. Any questions on that? Let's look at the new dependent cost items for man hours and equipment hours. Let's do a man hour add-on. Okay, so I'm going to base this one on CBS man hours. Okay, and by the way, this is where we're distinguishing. When we get to 11.1, you'll see resource utilization as an extra choice in here. Okay, so currently these two are looking at CBS man hours and CBS equipment hours. Okay, not down to the individual resource level. Okay, so if we go to CBS man hours, there's my add-on that I just created. If I drill into that. Okay, now our dependency is going to be based on, our add-on is going to be based on man hours, and you see that column right there called total man hours, okay, which right now is blank. If I say, let's do a general, maybe it's, that example we were talking about, a supplies add-on. Okay, by default, it looks at all the man hours in the CBS. So we got 24,000 man hours in this project. Okay, but again, I could go into the dependency and filter down. So maybe again, I just want to, maybe I want this contingency on all the roadway work. Okay, so all of my man hours that are related to roadway work, I'm going to add some money in there for that. Okay, so now my total man hours is down to 10,000. Okay, because that's just the man hours that are wrapped up in those roadway items. Now I want to add another $5 a man hour on top of those man hours.
And can you drag those, when after you're done, drag it down in underneath the...
We saw earlier how you repositioned those dependent cost items at the top of the CBS. Is it possible to move those down lower into the CBS?
They do. For the same reason that we can't mix them with the predefined items, they do have to be at the top, and again, that's just to avoid the circular calculations. If we were to move these down, as a dependency of unclassified excavation, they would be driving each other, right? Because as we change the man-hour add-on, it's going to change the excavation, which then changes the man-hour add-on, and you're just in a loop. Yeah. So those dependent cost items still have to be at the top.
Okay.
Okay. Now, like anything else, any other indirect or dependent item that's not assigned to a pay item, those costs can be spread back to all the pay items or any subset of the pay items in the project. But as we're modeling the estimate, we're setting up the structure. They're going to be at the top. All those indirects are going to be, they're just buckets up there that we're accumulating costs, and then we can decide what to do with them. How do we want to spread them? Any questions on dependent cost items and what we've done now with those enhancements? Pretty straightforward. All right, let's go to number 3. Okay, so what we'll cover next is really a number of changes around the Excel linking and embedding. Okay, so one of the things that we've done now is you can group the cell names by worksheet. Okay, so if you're making a bunch of links out to an Excel workbook and there's 37 worksheets in that workbook. Right now, we're going to be able to show you when we're picking the cells that we want to link to, we can group them by those worksheet names. Okay, so I can see just the cells that are in worksheet number 1, separate from the cells that are in worksheet number 2. And then this second part is really the main value here, which is we can prorate those Excel links to the superior item quantities. Okay, and this is a little bit complex, but to follow, so bear with me, and I'll take you through some an example that hopefully will make some sense. It's easier to show than it is to explain. So let's go do an example here. I'm going to close down these jobs that I don't need anymore. And I've got a job here that has a little bit of structure in it to facilitate this scenario that I want to show you. So let's go to the CBS. Okay, this is another mining example. You can kind of notice a theme here. This example is, so imagine that you are estimating what it's going to cost to do various drifts or shafts, or again, it could be anything. We're using drifts in this example. Okay, so we've got, the way I've got this set up here, I've got a couple of drifts in here. You could have a couple hundred, couple thousand, and I've just got 2 of them, and there's a quantity in each one of them. Okay, but if you look above them, I've set up kind of a model here for how I want to estimate drifts. Okay, so underneath drifts, I've broken it down into a few different subordinate items, one for mesh, one for explosives, one for equipment. I might have another one for labor. Okay, you can set this structure up any way you want. Under explosives, I've got a couple of different resources in there. Okay, one for detonators, which are measured by the each, and one for ANFO, which is measured by the kilogram. Okay, so a couple of things that I'm going to need to purchase, right, if I'm going to handle the explosives part of this drift. Okay, well, a lot of customers will have, there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out, well, for every meter of drift, you know, how many of these detonators am I going to need? How much ANFO am I going to need? Okay, so this is where the Excel linking really comes in handy, because we can, and I've got just a simple example here, but if I go into this model and I want to link this detonator calculation to an Excel spreadsheet, I'm just going to link to Excel. Okay, and this is where you'll see that first enhancement, which is where we can group the cell names in this list by worksheet. Okay, by default, it's unchecked, just like it used to be in the previous version of the product. So I just see a big list of all of my different cells, right? If I group it by worksheet name, okay, now I can see a little tree structure here. So here's all the different worksheets in that workbook. So if I was looking at haul cost, there's the only named cell in that worksheet. Okay, so you've got these different sheets. If I open up my performance sheet here, there's the cells that I really want to link to. Okay, and I could just choose them right here. Okay, but rather than doing that, let me pick from Excel. Okay, and that way you can see where these things are coming from. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this box, because I know that the thing that I'm linking to, I'm calculating it on a per, in this case, per meter basis. Okay, so I'm going to prorate that quantity so that if I were to copy this whole model under something that is measured as 100 meters, those links will still calculate whatever number I come up with times 100. If I copy it under an item that's 1,000 meters, it'll take whatever my Excel sheet says times 1,000. Okay, that's what this whole thing does by prorating. So let's look at the spreadsheet. I'm going to pick from Excel. And here's a very simple spreadsheet. Garrett can attest to the fact that this is a very simple example compared to some of the ones that I've seen that might be, you know, literally thousands of different cells that are being filled out to calculate some of these things. Okay, I've done just a really simple example here in terms of, you know, we're saying here that, hey, our standard calculation of how many detonators per meter of drift do we need is 50, and ANFO kilograms is 60. Okay, but we could also come in here and apply a waste factor. Okay, so let's put maybe a 5% waste factor, or maybe 10%, doesn't matter. Okay, so any value we put in here, let's start with a 10% waste factor. Okay, so I'm gonna link that value there, that detonators required per meter, back to the hard dollar field where we started from. Okay, so you're going to see that 45 come back into my hard dollar model right there. And now the ANFO one, I could do the same thing. I could go out to the spreadsheet and find it and link to it. But since I know it's already been named, I can just go right down to my performance sheet and choose the ANFO. That's the one I want. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got now. We've got this is again a very simple example, but what we have is a model based on, 1 meter of drift. We're saying that we're going to need 45 detonators and 54 kilograms of ANFO, which is ammonium nitrate, something like that. Ammonium nitrate fuel oil. Don't say you didn't learn anything in this session. Oh gosh, don't go there. Yeah, you're keeping notes at home for future terrorists. Okay, so what we have now is a model where, if I look at these drifts down below, this structure of mesh, explosives, and equipment, I want to just copy that down into all these items. I don't want it to, what I just did, I don't want to have to do that 197 times for all the different drifts that I have, right? So what I can do is, if I take that explosives item and copy it, right, or drag and drop it, I'm going to paste it onto number 1, and I'm going to let it adjust the quantities. So it brought in that explosives item underneath drift number 1, which is 200 meters. And if we open that up, we're going to see it's automatically calculated. So we need 9,000 detonators for that item. We need 10,800 kilograms for that item. Okay. Even though my Excel, that's not the number that was in my Excel spreadsheet, right? It's a different number. Okay, but since we checked that prorate box, when it brings the number back from Excel, it looks at the parent quantity and says, okay, we've got to multiply the number we find in Excel times the parent quantity.
So on that,
okay,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So on the verbiage on the dialogue was use superior cost item quantity. So how far up in the tree are we looking? Are we looking just at 3.1, or are we looking at 3? In the previous example, if you had a different quantity at 2 than you had at 2.2, would it use that, or is it using the 2.2 quantity?
Yeah, so it's always going to look one level above. So if we had made the link, let's go back to the model. If we had made a link right here, right on cost item 2.1, and that's where we link to Excel, okay, then it's going to look at its superior, which is 2. That's where it would get the prorate, right? In this case, since we put materials or resources, in this case, onto 2.2, the parent in this case is 2.2.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
That make sense?
That makes perfect sense. That was, again, the right answer.
So let's copy that one. Let's copy that one down to drift number 2, and I'll just drag and drop in this case, holding down the control key while I drag, drop it off on drift number 2. Okay, so now you can see that's a heck of a lot easier, right? If I had to estimate 200 and some odd number of drifts, rather than setting those links up 200 and some odd times, all I had to do was do it once, copy that item into all these different places, and now the beauty of this is, you can see that it's calculated different numbers now for drift number 1 at 200 meters. You need all this stuff. Drift number 2 at 4,000 meters, you need a lot more of that stuff. Okay, but the beauty now is, what if I want to change my waste factor? Okay. Previously, even if you had gone in and set up all those links, right, you'd have to go in, and change, right? You'd have to change each one of those. Now, all of those, even though they're calculating different numbers, if I go back to my Excel spreadsheet, which I can do by clicking on any of these things, okay, now I can go in and change my waste factor. Maybe I want to, let's make it really dramatic. Let's put a 50% waste factor and 50% on that one as well. So actually, that should be a plus sign there, shouldn't it, in my formula? So we need to buy a bunch more of this stuff, right? Because we're wasting a lot more. Okay, so, and again, this is just Excel. You can do whatever you want in Excel, but these are the numbers we're bringing back. Okay, so, but now, because of this new prorate option, when we bring these back into hard dollar, we're going to multiply those by their parent quantities to give us the right numbers. Okay, so let's close that. How do we update the job with the latest quantities coming from Excel? Paul, you're not allowed to answer. Jeffrey?
Refresh, you would go up to the Excel and refresh it, update the workbook.
Okay, so we're going to go to the workbook icon, and we're going to update the active job with Excel data. So this is going to go through and find all of those places where we've linked to those values in Excel, and we're going to get all of them updated in one fell swoop. So now we've got much bigger quantities throughout all of these items just by changing the waste factor in one place. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that, as we talk about, hard dollar's ability to create a detailed cost model compared to what you see in other systems that are much less robust, right? This is the kind of thing that you can really go in and spend some time creating a real model with a lot of different variables, a lot of different factors, some of which may be coming from Excel, like in this case. Right, but you've truly got a model of the cost now where all the moving parts are captured. Anything that we change, the model updates like any good model should. Okay. Any questions on that? Jeffrey?
All right, when you were doing your copy and pasting, is the functionality of doing multiple edits available in that? Selecting drift 1, 2, 3, 4, and pasting.
To paste an item onto multiple items? No. So the question was, can I copy that into, just like I could employ resources to a bunch of items by selecting them. If I had not resources on the right, I could insert resources on those selected items. But you can't paste on multiple items at this point. So you would have to, drag them into each item, right? But still a heck of a lot faster than defining them all from scratch.
Right answer, by the way.
Any other questions on that? On the Excel, the two changes we made there, grouping the names by worksheet and prorating. By the way, this will maintain the links now. This is something that previously would not have worked. If I were to come back up here and re-import a spreadsheet that gives me a new quantity for this drift, okay, and previous to this version, if I change this quantity up here, these Excel links would get broken, okay, because this quantity, the way we've got this model set up, if I want to change this quantity, it's going to assume that we want to change these quantities as well, right? And in the old version, that Excel link would no longer be valid because the number here would be different than what's in Excel.
If this is universal, what if you had a different waste factor from drift 1 to drift 45 was dramatically different for waste? How would you do that?
So the question came up, if the waste factor was going to be different for drift 1 versus drift 2, how would you handle that? The way I've seen customers handle that in their performance spreadsheets is you're going to have different types of performance based on different types of drifts. It might be a C-type drift or a D-type drift, or okay, so different parameters of the drift. Right? You might have 3 or 4 or 10 different types in a project. So in that case, you'd have one of those spreadsheets for each type.
So you'd link to a different spreadsheet.
You'd link to a different cell. Yep. Okay, but now, because we're prorating those links, I can still go change this quantity or this quantity, either one. It's going to push down. So if I double the size of that drift, what would we expect to happen to these numbers? Double, right? Right. So if I double this to 400, just like that, we've got our new calculations down in here for these things. Okay. Even though, again, those numbers are not the same number that's in my Excel spreadsheet, because we're prorating that whole relationship is maintained.
The same thing works as well if you're using like on-screen takeoff or something and update it.
Yep. The question was, does that apply if we were using on-screen takeoff or importing from Excel, something like that, that brought in a new quantity here, the exact same thing would happen, right? Once we change that quantity, it's going to push down to the children and calculate these new quantities here, okay, while maintaining those links. All right. Well, we're making good progress, so we might actually end up finishing early here, folks. Cross your fingers. Let's get into number 4. Okay, this is really cool stuff here for anybody that's producing proposals based on hours of resources and billing rates. Okay, and I'm looking at our professional services department, which does that, so I'm expecting you guys to use it.
Absolutely.
Okay, but engineering companies, consulting companies, contractors doing T&M work, right? Anything that's change order work, anything that's based on price lists, billing rates. Okay. So right, let's go ahead and look at the options here. This is all contained within a report that has 4 different options in it. Okay, so there's really 4 different reports we're going to give you. All of those are going to take advantage of the billing rates that we've specified for our resources. And we'll take a look at where those come from. And then you can also, on the fly, when you're creating, say, a proposal report, you can bump your rates up or bump your rates down sort of on the fly as you're creating a proposal without going back and changing all of your master rates. Okay, so let's go back to, I'm going to go back to that training job. And we'll first go in and take a look at our billing rates in that project and see where those get established. Okay, so our billing rates for resources are, as you would expect, in the resource rate register. We go in there. Here's all of our different resources. Let's go to labor. Okay, here's a kind of a typical labor resource. If I open that up. Okay, those of you that are familiar with how our rates are set up, we have a scale 1, scale 2, scale 3 for straight time, time and a half, double time typically is how those are used. Let's go to straight time. Okay, but what we're looking at here is a charge rate. So your estimated costs are always based on this charge rate. So if I employ this labor for 20 hours on an item, it's going to multiply that 20 hours times 1998 in order to calculate the cost of that labor on that item. Okay, but we can also specify a billing rate for this resource. Okay, so same thing applies here on billing rates. We can have, corresponding billing rate for each of our 3 scales. And by default, your billing rate is going to equal your charge rate, your internal cost rate. Okay, that's how it just works by default. So it just made them the same. Okay, but if I wanted to specify a markup, I want to put a 10% markup on my cost to drive my billing rate. That's all I've got to do, right? I just 10% on top of 1998 gives me a billing rate of 2198. Okay, if my customer and I have agreed, hey, when you employ a laborer or an engineer or whatever it is, that you can bill me $25 an hour for straight time work, I can just hard plug in the $25. Okay, and that calculates, well, you've got a 25% markup on top of your 1998. Okay, whichever one you enter, the red arrow points to that. Okay, and maybe for scale 2 work, if we're working time and a half, you can bill me $35 an hour. And up here, maybe, if we're working on Saturdays and Sundays, you can bill me $50 an hour. So we can establish these billing rates one resource at a time. or we could go in and, highlight all of our rates, or we could do it by category. If we had let me see if I've got a organizational category. So if we were grouped by organizational category, and so here's all the different categories: carpenters, finishers, ironworkers, operators. And maybe I want to set my billing rate. Maybe I want 10% markup on my operators. I can just double-click on the whole operator category, leave it set to all scales here, and I'll come into the billing rate and put in, I want a 20% markup on that whole category. Okay, so all my operators now have a 20%. Just my standard laborers, I'll take that group, and maybe we'll do them at a lower markup, 10%. Okay, so I can do that, one group at a time, one laborer at a time, or I can even just come in and highlight all, Control A, to highlight all the resources, all the categories, and apply a straight 5%, 10%, whatever I want to put in. Okay. You're going to see when we run the report, we could even have skipped this whole step. Even if we hadn't applied billing rates, when we run the report, we could apply just a standard percentage on labor or standard percentage on equipment at that time. Okay, so even if we hadn't taken this step, we can still do a billing rate report. Okay, let's take, just so we've got some numbers in there, I'll just take everything here and let's just sort of get a billing rate in for all of it at, let's say, 10%. Okay, so whatever the cost is for all those resources, it's going to add 10% to calculate my billing rate. All right, now comes the fun part. So if we go back and look at the estimate, so we'll go to our CBS. Okay, so this is our training job. We've already got resources employed on these things, right? If I open up excavation, you can see equipment in here. You can see labor in here. Okay, so all of these costs that we're seeing are based on our cost rate, our internal charge rate. Okay, previous to this version, if we wanted to create a proposal to our customer and put markup on, we would do that strictly through our pay item and proposal register. Right, create some pay items, go into our PBS and define markup, right, in the price breakdown structure, spread that markup back to the pay items. Okay, so it's for a unit price job in a complex project with multiple pay schedules, that stuff is great. For a simple services type project where we just want to create a proposal based on those billing rates, it was a lot of burden to have to do that, right? Well, now what you can do is go to report. This report we're talking about, because it works off the cost breakdown structure, is in that section. Right, so there's the report we're talking about, billing rate report. If I choose that, it's going to load up the data that it needs for that report, and then you're going to see some options over to the right. I see the pizza coming in, so I'm going to have to work extra hard to hold your attention for a second. Too late. Yeah, I already lost Brad. All right, so here's what we're talking about over here. The tabs up here, print, cost item selection, layout, header, footer, those are all standard tabs that you see on all hard dollar reports. Okay, the new thing here is the details. So let's go to that details. There's those four options that I mentioned. Okay, we can run a resource price list. Our customer just wants to say, hey, show me the rates you're using. Okay, if I'm gonna use you guys to do a project, tell me what you're charging for an engineer, for a CAD operator, for a dozer operator. Okay, let's do that one first. We'll just run that one. Down here is what I was talking about in terms of we can increase our billing rates or decrease them right here on the spot. So essentially we can put a premium on this proposal or discount it without having to go back and change the billing rates on all the resources like we did. Okay, let's make these, we'll just keep them at a straight 100%, which means I'm not changing them. I'm going to use 100% of the billing rate. Okay. We'll come back and do some scenarios where we change these in a minute. Okay, so we run a resource price list. I could choose what types of resources to include in that report. Okay, maybe I'm just a labor shop. I'm going to just give labor rates. I don't need to put all this other stuff in there. Okay, we'll just turn them all on. I'm going to run it. Okay, so this is going to generate a report based on whatever our layout settings were in header and footer. Okay, this one's real basic looking, right? But now you can see, this is our resource price list. Here's our labor, here's our equipment, and there's the billing rates for each resource. Okay, so just a simple price list, measuring it by the hour. Here's the billing rate based on that 10% adder that I put on. Okay. Same, as we get down, you can even do this on materials. Okay, so if you want to put a 5% handling fee or 10% handling fee, whatever it is on your materials, right, whatever your costs are per ton, per cubic yard, per gallon, right, you can add a percentage on top of that to give you a billing rate for materials. Okay, so that was really simple, just a price list that you can hand off to the customer. Let's do this next one, which is estimate details. Actually, let's do this one, which is a summary, and then we'll come back to the details so you can see the difference. Okay, let's run this summary with our billing rates. We'll go ahead and run that. Okay, this is going to give you again, a report that's intended to be able to hand off to your customer that gives the customer some detail in terms of the way this estimate is structured. So if we get down into our items, you can see the total for mobilization, the total for clearing and grubbing. Okay, so we look at clearing and grubbing, that $28,420 is based on these resources that are used, labor, equipment, uniques. Okay, so in this summary version, we're just showing you the types of resources that are being used. Okay, in the labor category, we're showing it's 480 hours in this clearing and grubbing section. Okay, but in this summary version, we're not showing you how much of that was an operator, a carpenter, a finisher, etc. We're just giving you the total 480 labor hours. Any idea where that rate came from?
The library? From the library?
Okay, so this rate, since we've totaled up all the hours of this labor, 480 hours could be 50 hours of a carpenter, 60 hours of an operator, right? Each of them have different rates. Okay, so what we show you here is a blended rate. Okay, so we take basically look at the total labor costs divided by the 480 hours, and that's your blended rate. Okay, and we get asked that from time to time. Our customers get asked, what's the blended rate of all the people that are working on a particular type of task? Okay. So that gives you that on the fly there. If we come down to the bottom, so this you can see in the gray lines, we give you totals for each section, if you will, each CBS leg. And then as we come down to the very bottom, okay, we're going to get grand total. Right, so this $4.24 million, this is the value of the CBS, but based on billing rates instead of our internal cost rates. Okay. Now the next question, well, let's run the other version. Let's go, let's do the detailed version, and this is where we'll break it out by individual resource type. Okay, so now when you look at clearing and grubbing, okay, now we can see, where did that blended rate, remember before it was like $23 an hour, that was the blended rate of all of these individual resources, their project billing rate, their hours. Right, so that blended rate was essentially a weighted value calculated off of all these utilization counts. Okay, so depending on whether you want a summary detail, both versions are available. Right, now let's get into this margin analysis. Now is more of an internal focus report. So the first two were something, or the first three were intended to be handed off to a customer to show, hey, what's my price for this stuff, whether it's for the whole project or just price list for the resources. This version is going to give me a margin analysis so I can see, based on those differences between my billing rates and my cost rates, what kind of profit am I going to make on this project? Okay, so let's run that. Okay, now this is, again, more of an internal focus report. So now we can see the same layout. Okay, we use the detailed layout so we can see all the individual resources. But now we can see what's our total cost based on our internal cost rates for all these resources? What's our total revenue based on our billing rates? What's the difference, which we're categorizing as markup? Okay, and then we give you two different percentages. What's the markup percentage and what's the margin percentage? See these that have 10% markup? That's exactly what we would expect, right? Because when we went into our labor resources, we calculated the billing rate by saying, let's put 10% adder on top of our cost, right? So it makes sense that we would see those 10% on those. We didn't do that for equipment or materials, et cetera, so that's only showing up on our labor. Anybody want to take a stab at the difference between markup and margin? Free shirt to whoever calculates it.
Margin, revenue minus cost divided by revenue.
Divided by cost divided by revenue. Yep. So the answer was a little bit different than, it was more elaborate than I would have explained it. But so it was revenue minus cost divided by revenue. Okay, so revenue minus cost is markup. Okay, so if you take that markup and divide it by revenue, that's your margin. If you take that markup and divide it by cost, that's your markup. Okay, so different people look at it different ways. Those numbers are meaningful to most people that are pricing this stuff, so we show it to you both ways. Okay, if we look down at the bottom, let's come all the way down to the bottom, and here's our grand totals. All right, now here we actually, in this project, in this training job, we have a negative profit overall on this project. Another free shirt for anybody that can guess why that might be the case.
Cost is more than your revenue.
That's a simple answer, yeah.
You said I over-explained the first one.
Yeah, you went to the other extreme on that one, buddy. This project actually has some, this was kind of a trick question, but this project has some, we had some billing rates actually defined for some of the materials, and then when we went and took quotes for some of those materials from outside suppliers, our quoted value actually came in higher than our billing rate for some of the items. Okay, so that's something that, you got to, as a contractor, you got to think about, right? If we're going to go buy something at a cost that's more than we can bill it for, you're going to know that by looking at this report.
It's not a winning business.
Not a winning business model. And so this is a great report for internal purposes, obviously, that allows us to see, what's the total. If we bill it, if we propose it this way to our customer, it's a $4.2 million revenue job, but on the downside is we're thinking our cost is going to be $4.3 million. All right, so we're going to want to go back and mess with that.
If you go into the report and instead of running it at 100%, you run it at 110, that doesn't go back to the CBS, does it? It's just for the report?
Correct, and in fact, that's a great example. Let's go use the bottom part. The comment was if we go change our, I believe what the comment was, if we go change these percentages here, is that going to go back into the estimate or back into the resource rates? And the answer is no. Okay, but it will affect the report. So if we wanted to get rid of that loss situation here, we could go in and put, I'll just be conservative here, right? Let's just double our resource rates. All right, so I'm gonna kind of calculate all of our billing rates based on a huge number, and hopefully this will give us some better margin, right? Okay, but that's only changing it for this project. Go down to the bottom now. I should say it's only changing it for this report. That looks a lot better. Okay, so now we got a lot of revenue, same cost that we had before, and now we got some positive profit, but only for this report. Nothing changed in the estimate itself, nothing changed in the resource rates.
But would you use it like a what if and how much you could mark up your labor?
Absolutely. So the comment was I like the way you think, Joni. The comment was we can use this as a what if type scenario, right? We could go in here without having to mess with our resource rates or change the estimate. Let's see what it would be if we used a 10% markup. Let's see what it would be if we used a 20% markup. Here's what it is if we did a 200% markup. I like this one. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. You can use that as a what if and do that on the fly. Okay, you guys can thank Rick Deans for this report, by the way. He's the one that facilitated this and pushed that through the process. So good job, Mr. Deans. And no, you don't get a free shirt. All right, you guys locally here, you want to grab some pizza while we're wrapping? You guys are welcome to get some food and eat while we're wrapping up before it gets cold. Everybody online, I wish we could send you some, but
Oh, we can. I got it for yesterday.
huh? Did you get it assault?
Yeah. I got the schedule coming in.
Okay. Making progress?
Well, I don't know what to do with it now.
Oh, okay.
I mean, one thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have the AFP, the first level of the CBS structure. I'd like to go graph it from that level, graph the first level, and you want to lower one,
Okay.
the costs are it, and also print it out. My house, everything.
Oh, okay. So you want to that's you want a graph for each one, or the dollar
Graph
amount?
or a cost spread,
Okay.
AFP. So there's lots of customer reports.
Do you want to facilitate make a list of the things as well, or you want us to have somebody sit there and take notes?
Dave says in company. Dave tried it.
Folks, we're gonna take about a 5-minute break here, and then we'll start up again in about 5 minutes. so forward, and again, if you're looking at your watches, just remember, even though we're only a third of the way through the list, we're way more than halfway done, because as we go through these, they get smaller and smaller as we go. So we should still be on track from a schedule perspective. All right, so number 5, create custom cost curves to drive cash flow accuracy. As I mentioned before, our cost curves used to be, your choices were between 4 predefined cost curves: front-loaded, back-loaded, bell-shaped, and linear. But now we can create custom versions of that. And you can specify essentially how many buckets are in the curve, if you will, how many periods, and put in a percentage for each period. And why would we do that? Well, when we get to the cash flow graph, the cost of the item is going to be spread over its start and finish dates according to that curve. Okay, so if we have a lot of it up in the first few periods and less of it in the last few, you'll see a curve that reflects that when we get into cash flow. Okay, this one of the other things we're going to look at is our manual schedule option, and these two things really go hand in hand. Where you can go in and say, this thing is going to take 6 months. It's going to go from January to June, and then again, without having to go through creating a complex schedule, you could just do the manual schedule. It goes from January to June. Put a cost curve on it that spreads it the way you think it's going to go. If it's a paving item or a bridge item where you're getting better and better productivity as you go, you can ramp it up over time very easily that way. Okay, so let's go take a look at how we do that. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the system here, and in fact, let's go back to, let's use this job. It'll be easier to focus on what we're doing. So I'm gonna go in and turn on my cost curve column. So I'll drag up that cost curve. We don't need that code column anymore, so we'll get rid of that one. Okay, let's take a look at, let's see, I thought this was a manual one. This is Microsoft Project, so let's update this. Okay, we'll get to the manual schedule option in just a bit. For now, we'll just use MS Project. Okay, so we'll just take the default kind of start and finish dates for everything. Okay, so we get for the few items that are in this job that have costs on them, the default cost curve is linear, so we see a linear curve going. And remember, this is cumulative, so if it's a constant, rise over run here, right? If it's straight, then you can assume that it's linear. Okay, so let's go back now and let's take this item here, which is $1 million, and just to show you, if we did a bell-shaped curve, now it looks a little bit different, right? That reflects the fact that we're ramping up and then ramping down. Since it's cumulative, the fact that we're ramping down means the slope is going to be flatter until we're not doing anything else, right? We've ramped all the way down, and from this last year, nothing's going on. That's why it's flat. Okay, but now what you can do, and there's those 4 choices that that are out of the box and predefined. Okay, what do we do when we're in one of these drop downs and we don't see what we want? We want to create something new. Yep, Joni called it out there. So we click the asterisk button, right? So there's our new button. This didn't used to be there. In previous versions, we had the drop down. We could choose those 4, but that was it. Now you can click this asterisk, and we've got a cost curve record where we can define a cost curve. And that cost curve that we define here can be used over and over and over again. Okay? You don't have to do it if you get a bunch of items that are going to use the same spread, the same curve, you can do it once. And that's why we give you the ability to name this curve. Okay? So let's put in a name for this. This is going to be Joni's curve. No comments. Okay, so you can define the number of points in the curve. Okay.
Let me make a note of that.
All right, so we'll put in, you can put any number you want, right? So what this is going to do is, if you think of the curve, just the number of points in the curve, if we put in 5, we're going to get 5 buckets in which we can spread, define that curve. Okay, so let's do 5, and now we can go on and put in the percentage. Maybe we want, let's do something dramatic, and we'll put, maybe 80% of it up front. In fact, let's do it, let's say 40, 40, 10, and then 5, and then 0. Okay, so this is kind of a front-loaded, but it's because there's more at the beginning and less at the end, right? But it's different than our standard front-loaded. Now down below, you see where it says 95% is my total, so I'm missing 5%. Okay, if I were to click OK and try to get out of here, it would tell me this has got to equal 100. Okay, so let's put another 5% there at the end. Okay, so I've got that spread. I've got a name on it, so that curve can be reused again. Now that I've got that curve applied, right? Does that make sense why that graph looks like that? Almost everything is happening in those first 2 months, here and here, or first 2 years in this case, here and here, and then it's flat pretty much the rest of the way. There is a 5% going on here, but you can barely see the incline because it's such a small number.
Does it distribute all of the costs associated with that item on that graph, or is it just resources, or is it costs only?
Okay, good question. The question was, based on that curve, does it distribute all of the costs according to that curve? And the answer is that that cost curve can be applied at the cost item level. Okay? It could also be applied at the resource level. So, for example, that explosives item there, which does have resources on it, if you look at your resource employment, there's a cost curve for those as well. Okay, so we could have the detonators, using Joni's curve. We could have the ANFO doing maybe for your materials, you're going to buy all that stuff up front, so you want the cost to hit at the very beginning. Right, so you could go in and you can set up standard cost curves for your resources right up in the resource rate register. Okay, so every time you employ a ANFO, it could have the appropriate curve already set up for it. Okay. But on this employment, if I wanted to change it, I wanted to use Joni's curve, I can override that.
So is it safe to assume that we've got now a cost curves tab in foundation setup data and master foundation setup data?
You got it. So if we wanted to go in and look at our custom curves, if we go into either the library master foundation setup data or inside the jobs forms foundation setup data, either place, there is a new tab in here called cost curves, way off to the right. So there's our cost curves. There's Joni's curve that we just added. Okay, notice that's the only one that we can edit. The others are predefined. We can't change them. Okay, but I can edit Joni's curve by double-clicking on it, or right from here I could have gone in and added a new curve, okay, that would show up and allow me to assign that curve then to all the items.
Beautiful.
Okay, so got a lot more control now in terms of how especially for for big projects where your periods, like in this case, we're looking at it by the year. You can really play with those for something that goes over 5 years, 10 years. You're really going to want to have more control over those cost curves than just the 4 options that we previously had. Okay, when we get to the manual schedule section, then we'll kind of revisit this and see how those things can be used together. Okay, any comments or questions on that, on custom cost curves?
It's really a good feature. It's going to solve a lot of problems. It's really nice.
Good. Yep, I know for people that are using the scheduling, the integrated scheduling and the cash flow, that is definitely something that comes up quite often. Overlay actual values with planned values, number 6. Okay, this is where we can start to graph our actuals over time as they're recorded through our job tracking and project controls tools. We can overlay those actuals versus the estimate. The other thing we did was the titles in the cash flow graph previously were predefined. Okay, so the labels for things like cost and revenue were out of the box locked down. Now those titles, where applicable, they reflect your column captions. Okay, so let's go take a look at what we mean by that. If we go into cash flow, let's go to our training job because we've got some more values in there. Nope. Let's go. Oh, we're looking at that by year. So let's go change that. So on cash flow, we can define, what's the period that we want to look at. Right now, what we were looking at there was by year, and what we want to look at is, let's get something more granular here. Let's go by month. Okay, so now we have a curve. As we go into our display settings, you're going to see a lot of new things in this graph. Right? We've more than doubled the number of options that you have to display on the graph now. Okay, so let's kind of walk through them, and we'll talk about some other changes as we go. Okay, so first of all, over here, we already talked about choosing the period. I believe, if I remember correctly, we didn't used to have quarter, so now we do have quarter as an option. Okay. Then we've also added, if you look down below, these two down at the bottom are new, as-built cost and planned total cost to date. Okay, so both of these things are going to be based on data coming from the job tracking side of the program. As the project gets underway and we start to record progress and actual costs, we can graph that. We can graph, hey, what should we have spent to date based on our budget and our progress. Those two things are based on progress. Okay, and all these things have color selectors where you can choose what color you want those things to show up as. Okay, the titles of these things are going to look different to you than they did before, because now we're reading these titles directly from the register where that value is. Okay, so if I go back to my CBS register, there's that total forecast cost. That's the actual value we're graphing. If I change this to cost, when we go back to cash flow and go to our settings, you can see now it says cost. So, total price, that's going to be coming from your pay item and proposal register. And so there's a column in that register called total price. If you want to call that something different, go to that register and relabel it, and it'll show up here. Okay. These two right here, cash flow and finance costs, those are calculated values that don't exist in a register anywhere, so those will be labeled the way they're labeled. Okay, there's no control over those. Okay, but all these others, you can change the titles. Okay, and then this section now, in the cost categories section, these are our cost, top level cost categories. There's 10 of them. Right? Previously, we had estimated values. Okay, so we could look at, for example, let's turn off everything except for, maybe we just wanted a graph of what do we expect our labor cost to be, and what do we expect our equipment cost to be based on the estimate. Right? We can graph that. So there's those two lines on the graph. Okay, well, once the project gets underway, now it would be nice to be able to see, how are we tracking against those lines, right? So we'll go add some things in this project, put some expenses in, and those will start to show up on the graph. Okay, so we can graph, these two columns here are new now, so we can graph as-built values for these things, and then we can also graph planned-to-date values for these things. Okay, planned-to-date, let's say we were 20% done with the project. Okay, this is going to give you the graph of what should we have spent to get to where we are. Okay, so if we were 20% done and we were graphing these values, which we should see lines that go up 20% of the budget for those things. Okay, and that will give us a comparison. Typically, you're going to want to compare the as-built to the plan-to-date. Okay, the plan-to-date will show you what should we have spent up to that point. The as-built will show you what did we spend up to that point. Okay, so all of those values there are new. Resource utilization, we're adding the same type of information now for your resources. We can graph. This is all the same. We can graph by resource type or resource code, description, however you want to choose the resources and roll them up. Maybe we want to do it based on the type. Okay, but now for labor, we can look at the estimated quantity and the estimated cost, but now we can also graph our as-built quantity and our as-built cost. Okay, so as we start recording expenditures against resources, those values will hit the graph. Okay, and you can choose different colors for all of those things. These are all color selectors. And then down here, now you can also choose, each one of those four values, you can choose how do we want to show that on the graph. My quantity I want to show as a bar. My as-built quantity maybe I want to show as a line. Okay, or maybe I want to show them as stacked bars. Right, that'll stack the as-built right on top of the estimated or original forecast. So these two options down below, as-built quantity and as-built cost, are both new options that you can choose. How do we want to show those new values, those as-built values on the graph? All right, let's go and let me see if I've got I think that I've got a job with as-built in there. Let's just go ahead and record some as-built costs and some quantities and such. So we'll take this training job and let's go to job tracking, and let's just go into one of these items, and I'll just record a expense. Looks like that one's got some expense on it. So this one has a expense on here already of up at 0. So let's add some expense in here. I'll just put in I don't know, $30,000 for labor, $30,000 for equipment. Okay, so that's going to give us some as-built costs as we look at our as-built cost line. Now we have some actuals in there. Right, some labor and equipment costs. If we go back to cash flow and turn on our as-built values for those, for labor and equipment, let's put them in a different color. Maybe we'll do gray for that one and a lighter version of that. Okay, so now we should be able to compare all of those values. Okay, so let's do it this way. Let's take just so we can focus on it, let's do just the a little better color here. Okay, so if we were, let's say we were right here on August 31st, we could zoom into that section and see, this solid line is what our estimated cost was up to that point. The dotted line is what our actual cost was up to that point. Okay, so as we start recording progress from turning in timesheets, importing as actual costs from our financial system, Okay, anything that shows up, anything that drives cost into that as-built cost column, as everybody knows, there's lots of ways to do that. I just named a few of them. Okay, but whatever ends up in that as-built column, now we have the ability to graph that right there on the graph. Now, if we go back and look at, let's turn on the planned cost to date. Let's turn off that number, which gives us the graph for the whole estimate, and let's look at just the planned cost to date. We'll do that as a darker color. And let's reset our zoom. Okay, now in this case, because I haven't recorded a lot of progress for that item, remember planned cost to date is based on progress. Okay, so based on the small amount of progress, if we go back to the tracking register here, and let's turn on our percent complete. Okay, so we're saying that item where we have all that $63,000 of actual cost, we said we've recorded progress up to the point of saying we're 15% complete with that work. Okay, so what this graph is now showing us is that in order to achieve 15% completion, we should have spent, $931 for our equipment. You see, as I hover over that data point, it gives me the number. Okay, and what we actually spent was a lot more than that, $30,000. So, we can look at it kind of on a total level. Where are we in total? We can look at it on the basis of what should we have spent in comparison to what we did spend. That makes sense? Okay. My data is kind of off here in terms of making it a realistic example, but hopefully you can kind of get the idea. Any questions on any of that? Okay, same thing exists just as a reminder. I mean, I didn't graph them all, but we could graph, actual, as we record timesheets, for example, and record hours for labor and equipment. We could come in and graph those both in terms of the estimated quantity, hours, tons for materials, any resource type. We can also graph the estimated values versus the as-built values, down at the individual resource level by code, by description. And so all of that is available to graph. And keep in mind, what we're doing by basically every one of these checkboxes gives us a new value on the report. Right? So if we turn that, maybe we got 3 values on the report now. When I go to this Excel dump, it's going to give me an Excel sheet by period for all 3 of those things. So if we go out to Excel now, so if somebody wants to see the data behind that graph, remember we said we wanted to graph it by month, right? So here's our months. There's our months, and there's the 3 data sets that we checked the boxes for that are on the these are the 3 lines of the graph. Here's all the data behind them. Okay, so you'll see when you're looking at as-built, it's going to flatten out after, because this is the month we incurred the cost, so it hasn't changed after that. Same with our planned cost to date. Since we're at 15% complete, that's not going to change until we say that we're 20% complete or 30% complete. So the further we get into the project, you'll see these numbers go up. You'll see these numbers go up, right? And hopefully there's a nice correlation between all 3 of those numbers. All right, any other questions on that one? Good to go? All right, number 7, load equipment resource costs into hard dollar from InfoMine. This is going to be a good test of our internet connection here, so we'll see if this is going to work for us. Okay, InfoMine, for those of you that are not familiar with InfoMine, it's really a third-party expert, if you will, on mining information, on the mining market. They do a lot of analysis within the mining sector. What we're leveraging them for is to give us equipment costs. One of the things they do based on feedback from some of their customers in the mining sector is they look at what does a piece of equipment cost per hour of usage or over time, so we can look at, what do we expect that piece of equipment to cost. And so if we don't have that history, we can basically pull it in from InfoMine. Okay, so we're going to do that from our resource register. This is where we're going to access that. All right, so I'm going to go into, let's go back to that mining job that doesn't have any equipment in it yet. Okay, so I'm going to go into that mining job, the resource rate register. If we look at our construction equipment list, there's nothing there right now. Okay, notice there's a new toolbar icon here called InfoMine. Okay, this link is a standard part of the product. Okay, but to use it, it does require an InfoMine subscription. Okay, so if your customer has an InfoMine subscription already, they don't need anything else from us. They're ready to go. Okay, if they want an InfoMine subscription, we point them to InfoMine. Okay, that's not something that we provide. Okay, but if I click on that, assuming our internet connection will handle it here, this is going to take us out to the InfoMine site. Okay, good news. Oh, didn't remember me.
You don't either.
If I can remember what my login credentials are, because it's not even me. I'm using a borrowed account. I think it's John's old account, so let's see if I can figure this out. Oh, well, you know what? It's probably, I forgot the rest of the stuff here, so let's.
Sure, I have a hard dollar.
Hey, we're in there. Okay, so this is we're accessing this from inside of Hard Dollar, but it looks exactly the same as if you had just gone out to your web browser and gone to InfoMine and went into your account. Okay, so we're just putting a wrapper around it. If you look down on the bottom right, there's an Add to HD button, which isn't active yet, so we'll see that that'll become active here in just a little bit, or we can close it and come right back into Hard Dollar. Okay, but everything inside this window is InfoMine. And what you can do, you can see some of the test fleets and things we've been creating here as we've been working with this. What you can do is you can create different fleets. Okay, so if I go into let's just create a new fleet. So I'll just add new project, and we'll give it a name. We'll call it Jeffrey's fleet. Okay, we can specify, where is this fleet? What's it relevant to? We'll say it's Tempe. It's for HDC. Who's the estimator? Jeffrey Nesbitt. Okay, so we'll save that fleet. Right, and now what we can do is we can add equipment into that fleet. So where to go? Right down there. If I open that up, okay, now I can add inventory into this fleet. Okay, all this stuff is standard settings. I'm not going to go through all that right now, but InfoMine gives you the ability to change this stuff. Okay, so some of these basic settings, like your currency and other things like that, some of these parameters that are going to drive your equipment cost, you can go in and modify this stuff. Okay, now the user interface on this is, I would say, not exactly intuitive from InfoMine, but what we're doing now is we don't have any. You see there it says the project list is empty, so I don't have any inventory. And the way I do that is I come up here, I've got to choose what kind of equipment do I want to add into my inventory. So I can look at all equipment and choose, or I can, if I know I'm looking for underground equipment, I can click underground and then go into the subcategory. Maybe I'm looking for load haul dump machines. Click on that. And now what it does, it gives me a list of the different types of machines that fall into that category. Okay, so we're in this LHD category, and it's showing us the different machines that fall into that category. And different parameters. So depending on the kind of machine you choose, you're going to have different things in here. In this case, we're looking at motor type, horsepower, right? So we can see, this is a smaller machine than this one in terms of the horsepower. There's a description in here with a little more detail. Okay, but I can go through and find the machines I want. If I know I'm going to need, 3 of those guys and 2 of those guys, okay, now I've got those in my fleet. And I'm going to, or as soon as I click Add to Inventory, they will be in my fleet. Okay, now notice now that we have some equipment in this InfoMine project, my Add to HD button is activated. Okay, maybe I want some more stuff. Okay, let's go get some, maybe we need some surface equipment, some compactors. Okay, different types. Maybe we need 3 of those. Okay, and this is what I was talking about when we're looking at compactors. In this case, there's different parameters that we also see the weight, okay, in terms of pounds and kilograms. If you use InfoMine, all this stuff is going to make sense to you. Okay, so we'll add that to inventory. Okay, so now we've got 3 compactors and 5 LHD types, 3 of one size, 2 of another. Okay, when I click Add to HD, we're going to pop up a screen that gives you some options in terms of what do we want to do with this stuff. Okay, so first of all, we could choose, maybe I'm still thinking about which compactors I'm going to use. I don't want to bring those into hard dollar yet, so I can uncheck that box. Maybe I want to, when I bring these in as resources in hard dollar, I want to add a prefix to their resource code to help me identify. Maybe I've already got a bunch of resources in my equipment list. Now when I bring these in from InfoMine, I want to easily be able to see which ones came in from InfoMine. So I'm going to do that by, you can put whatever code you want on here. And let's make this real explicit. We'll just put InfoMine in front of it. Okay, so you'll see where that shows up in the code. A couple options up here. If these machines already exist in my database in hard dollar, do we want to overwrite them with these new ones? And lastly, do we want to copy the specs into the notes? Okay, so specs, if you look at this stuff down here, those are the specs. And those are going to be, there's different information in there for different types of equipment. Okay, the only place that we can really put that is in our resource notes. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, when I click OK, it's going to close down the InfoMine view, and it's going to add those machines into my database. Okay, so you see what it did to the code. Okay, so it took basically the model number, which that's a 470, that's a 471. It preceded that code with the word InfoMine, so I can tell which ones are coming from InfoMine. And if I open that up, voila, I've got a cost already there. Okay. So if you are, working with some, you're going to need some equipment that you've never used before, you don't have any history on it, InfoMine is a great, starting point, right? I mean, you can certainly come in here and edit this. Now notice we break it down into these categories, ownership costs, all this detail comes in from InfoMine. Okay, so if you think that, your mechanics are better than the standard out there in the industry, and so we're going to, instead of having, $6 an hour for mechanics, we're only going to need $5 an hour. For every hour this machine is used, we're only going to have $5 an hour for repair labor. So we bring in all this stuff from InfoMine, but you can go in and change it, modify it, and really make it your own.
Having used InfoMine in the past, and I'm not sure it's not any different than any other industry, whether it's silver or not, you really have to understand what they're presenting in their cost before you start just grabbing loader costs and stuff, because there's capital recovery, mechanics costs. It's very prone for double dipping. If they're adding a cost for maintenance or mechanics, and on top of everything, you're adding a mechanics or maintenance line item in your estimate. It's very
be careful, know what you're getting into. Yeah, so the comment from Garrett at Freeport, as a user of InfoMine, I think it's a good sort of disclaimer is to make sure that you really understand the data. There's a lot of assumptions that InfoMine makes in terms of how those costs are calculated, and if you're not careful, you'll end up doubling up. Right? So the caveat with that is make sure that you really understand the data. InfoMine does have, I don't know if you noticed it out here off to the left, when we go into InfoMine, I bet it's going to make me log in again, isn't it? I said remember me. Oh, well, we can still see the links. These definitions out here and all these links out here will I think, will help explain some of that stuff, so you can kind of see how did InfoMine come up with these numbers? What were their assumptions, and what are the definitions of all those things? So, good point. Make sure you know what you're getting there as you're pulling those values in.
Do you have any idea what the cost for an InfoMine subscription is? How it's done, annually or?
I don't. Not sure. Yeah, I know Ron's been working on kind of the business relationship with them, so he probably knows. We should figure that out.
Does it bring in any of those categories as tags or anything like that?
Yeah, it doesn't. So, and the reason for that, we wanted to bring in some of those things as tags, like the horsepower and the weight, but InfoMine is not consistent. Sometimes the weight is there, sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's in a different field than it is with other machines. So we couldn't figure out any way to bring that stuff in consistently. So we take all those specs and put them in the notes. Right? If we go back to
you can put it in.
Yep. So if we go ahead and look at that 470 and go to the setup, right there in the notes is where we put all of those specs in. Okay, so you can at least reference it and see that it's a diesel machine. It's 42 horsepower. The motor's included. It's always nice. Any questions on InfoMine? Okay. All right. Coming down to the wire. Control the master CBS. This one will take us about 30 seconds. Okay, so if we go into our dollar, go into our library, master CBS. Okay, I've got a view here that is the last view that I left it with. But what we've done now, first of all the stuff that we talked about with dependent cost items when we were looking at them inside of a project, same thing is true here in the master CBS. We can call these whatever we want. We can go in and create new ones, insert new dependent cost items. Okay. But the main thing I want to show you here is that there's a new column called Auto Include. Okay, so with that column in view, if we want, if we come in and we've defined an EPCM fee, that's a custom one. And so if we've defined that based on certain parameters, percentage add-ons, all that kind of stuff, and we want that to come into every new project we create, all I've got to do is check that box. Okay, so if I haven't checked all the other ones, okay, so if I go create a new project now, you'll see when we go in there that the EPCM fee is going to be in there automatically, but none of the other dependent cost items will be in there. Okay, so there's my CBS for the new job 2. None of the other things came in there automatically like they used to. The one that I did check came in automatically. Okay, so now as we start building up our estimate, that EPCM contingency or fee calculation is just going to increase, as we start putting costs into the estimate. Pretty straightforward, right? Told you that was easy. All right, number 9, some options that we've added for filtering out non-utilized resources. And this really shows up in 2 places where previously we couldn't do this. In the resource cost details register, we've added a utilized column, so you can easily see which ones are utilized and which ones aren't. And then our resource rate details report now has an extra checkbox to include only the utilized resources. Okay, so let's just briefly look at those. And these are pretty simple. Let's go back to, let's take that training job because there is some utilization in there. So if we go into that job, go to our resource rate register, and this might be, some folks may not realize that we actually have a lower level register. You know, at this point, if we're looking at equipment, you know, this view here, this resource register view shows us, you know, some basic information. What's the you know, each machine and what's the total unit cost? What's the utilization count? So this machine is being used for 233 hours in this estimate. But if I wanted more detail about the cost of that machine, I can go into my resource cost details register. Okay, this is going to take me down a level. Okay, so if I go in here, now I can see for all those machines, not only just that $62.80 total cost, but I can see how does that break down in terms of all those parameters, you know, ownership costs and depreciation and operating costs and lube oil and, you know, repair costs and all that kind of stuff out to the right. Okay, so this view has always existed, but what we've just recently added is this column where you can filter on the utilization. Okay, so we could say, you know, give me, right, by default, we're going to see even stuff in here that is not utilized. In the estimate, you can see the utilization is 0. Okay, so there's zeros all the way across here. But now, previously you couldn't filter it down to just the ones that are utilized. Now that we've added this column, we can say, show me everything that's not blank, and now that filters out those zeros. Okay, so if I wanted to print a report of this, dump it out to Excel, I used to have to dump it to Excel and then go find all the 0 rows and delete all of them. Right now I don't have to do that. Okay, simple thing, but something that's come up quite a bit. Same kind of deal on our resource rate report. If we go in here and do a resource utilization report, okay, and we look at our details option, let's see, am I on the wrong one? It's this one. Oh, there it is. Hadn't come up yet. So if I'm on that resource rate details report, on the details tab, this option right there is new. Okay, so again, same kind of deal. Previously, without that option, when you ran the report, you're going to get all the resources, whether they're utilized or not. Okay, now if we check that box, our report is only going to give us the equipment resources that are actually utilized in the project. Okay, any questions on that? All right, number 10. This is another 30-second job here. Easily see who's working in the current job. Okay, we're going to go to Tools, Users in Current Job, and that's going to show us who is working in this job with me. Okay, so if you're working on a network, whether people are connected remotely or on the LAN or however they're connected, if they're in the job, we go to Tools, Users in Current Job, you're going to see the list of all of those users that are working in that project. Okay, I'm running as a standalone, so you don't see anything in there. We had 10 other people all working in the project. It'd be nice to know who those people are, right? So that gives us that, puts it front and center, easy to get to. We can see who else is working in the job.
Contact info, what's their just name?
It's going to give you the name and their network tag, essentially, what they're, so depending on how they've set up the users through their Windows authentication, you're not going to get any contact info, but you might see the device where they're working, or you might see all the Active Directory type stuff, what their name is and that kind of stuff. Any other questions on that one? Okay, manual schedule option. Let's spend a little bit of time on this one. And because this is pretty cool stuff here. What you can do on this is we can choose manual schedule to define our start and finish dates without the use of Primavera or Microsoft Project. Okay, so for simple projects or for customers who do not use Primavera or Microsoft Project and don't need the power of those scheduling systems, we just want to plug in some start and finish dates. You can now do that right in the tool. Okay, so we're going to set that on the Job Properties Schedule tab. Right, now we can also, as we've seen, we can also import those start and finish dates from Excel. Right, remember earlier on we did an import. We could map to the start and finish date in the Excel spreadsheet and bring them in that way. So let's go back to this mining project. Actually, I want to go to that new job. It's a little simpler to deal with. Okay, so this new job, let's go to our job properties, and this is where we're going to select on the schedule tab, what do we want to use to drive the schedule dates. See a new option in there. Used to have Primavera Microsoft Project, now we have manual as another choice. Go ahead and say yes. Okay, so this is going to, now keep in mind there is no interaction between these methods. Okay, so if you schedule it manually and then switch over to Microsoft Project, Microsoft Project is not going to be aware of the schedule that you've already created manually, just like Primavera is not aware of Microsoft Project and Project's not aware of Primavera. Okay, so typically you're going to use one or the other. You're not going to, don't try to mix and match them. Okay, we'll keep it as manual. Okay, and I've got a little view here where I've moved some columns over to the left to do some manual scheduling very easily. Okay, so as you would probably expect with a manual schedule, if we've turned on our start and finish columns, now we can just go right into those columns. If I think my, this drift right here is going to start, I can just go right to my calendar. It's going to start in November. Got a start date earlier than the finish date. Let's put this out in December. These roll up to the top, so let's build them from the bottom up. Okay, I mean, you can kind of see what I'm doing. You can go in and choose, down at whatever level you want to do it at. We don't put a limit on it in terms of if you want to just schedule at the, at the red level and not go down to the blue level, you can do that. Let's make this. Let's take one of these things that's got some numbers in it here. So this you can kind of start to see where this manual schedule can really come into play with the cost curve. If I turn on that cost curve column, okay, so you can really play with all of these factors, right? If I go into that particular item 4.1, that explosives item, if we put some labor on there. Let's go add a resource, and we'll put some labor on it. Let's take kind of a standard labor resource, and we'll have a production rate of maybe, 10 meters a day, see what that gives us. Okay, so you can come in here, put in your crew and a production rate, in this case in terms of meters per day, and that calculates, well, it's going to take 400 days. Okay, if you're using Primavera or Microsoft Project, we can automatically, if you tell it when it starts, then we can go 400 days out and give you a finish date. Okay, with a manual schedule, that relationship is totally up to you to define. So even though my cost is based on 400 days, okay, if I go over to my schedule here, I can specify any duration. Okay, but if I want to keep it in sync, I'm going to have to think, okay, it's 400 days, so that's, how many months is that? All right, 13, 14 months, whatever that is. And fill in my start and finish dates accordingly. Right, so I could go in and say it starts in October, and it's going to go through, maybe November of next year. Okay, I could just type in the dates if I want, or choose it from here. Okay, so that's about 13 months. Okay, so hard dollar is going to take, regardless of what the estimate says it's 400 days, that's how I got my cost. When we look at the schedule and we look at the cash flow, it's going to spread that cost between October 5th, 2011 and November 5th, 2012.
What if you put the duration that was less than 400 on the start and finish date?
It'll squish the cost into that period. Okay, so yep, so it's going to, and that's where the cost curve comes into play. Okay, because whatever that duration is, that cost, in this case, $993,000, is going to be spread across that time period defined by the start and finish date. Okay, so the 400 days is what we use to calculate that $993,000.
So the 400 days is effort, really, not duration.
It is duration, but when we're doing a manual schedule, we're ignoring that duration. You can define the work schedule manually. Right? On Microsoft Project and Primavera, we'll recognize that 400-day duration. And so if you change the start date, 400 days later will be your finish date. If you move the start date up, 400 days from that will be your finish date. Okay, but when we do a manual schedule, based on how we see people wanting to use a manual schedule, we're basically saying, hey, all bets are off.
Yeah.
You go in and you put it in whatever you want, right? You're kind of on your own. Okay. But again, that's where that cost curve comes into play. So, if this is a 13-month item or whatever it is, right? In this case, it's about 13 months. That $1 million, this cost curve is what's going to allow us to, define how is that going to spread, right? We can use that curve that we created before, the infamous Joni's curve, or we could go create a new curve, right? So we could spread that. If we just wanted linearly, it's going to take that $993,000 and spread it equally into those 13 months, or whatever that duration is per day. And that's where, there's some pretty complex math there. If we look at these curves, if we go back to that curve we defined, this curve, remember, it had five buckets in it, right? So if we're gonna spread that, remember that $990,000 across 13 months using this curve. You can imagine the math that goes on behind the scenes there. What we're doing is we're basically fitting it into these buckets. So we're taking that 13-month time frame, dividing it up into 5 buckets, and then proportioning it, right? So if we had, let's say it was 10 buckets, and if we were doing it by month and it was 10 months, that's easy to follow the math in that case, because each one of these would be, you're basically, it's the same percentage, right? But we're putting it into 10 buckets instead of 5. The first 4 buckets would be at 40%. The next 2 would be at 10%, right? And the next 8, the next 8 would be at 5%. Okay, so we proportion those cost curves. We'll proportion that to the duration of the item defined by the start and finish date. Okay, so, and that's what allows you to use these. You can create these cost curves that really just define kind of the general spread, and then use them for any item, whether it's a 1-month item or a 500-month item. You'll still get that nice same spread that you're looking for. Any questions on that as far as the manual schedule? And just a reminder, I think there's 2 ways that's going to be used. Just manually put in the dates like I'm doing here, or again, import those start and finish dates from Excel using Excel as a data source. Right. So we can import those start and finish dates if you've got a spreadsheet. I'm always amazed at how many people do schedules in Microsoft Excel. You know, Garrett's smiling over there. I mean, you know, Excel, as we all know, can be used to do just about anything, which is part of the risk of it. It can be used to do just about anything, including getting you in a lot of trouble. But yeah, but you know, you can, if you've got a schedule that you want to maintain in Excel, and then in hard dollar, just import, map to those start and finish date columns, maintain your schedule out in Excel. So Excel becomes really just like Project in Primavera in terms of how hard dollar can leverage those schedule dates. If you wanted somebody that's kind of the scheduling guru in the company to maintain the schedule in Excel, they don't need a hard dollar license to do that. But they can create the schedule, we can import it and update the cash flow and everything in the hard dollar. I said it's possible, not recommended. All right, any questions on that? Manual schedule? All right, and the last one is more of a discussion point, not really, not something I can show. I'm not using Primavera version 8, but I do want to talk about it here because there's a couple of important things. First of all, if you update to version 11 or 11.1 when that becomes the public release, your Primavera integration is going to look differently. It's going to work differently than it did before, regardless of which Primavera version you're using. Okay, so let me let that sink in for a minute. Okay, and here's what happened. In order to work with Primavera version 8 and forward, because of changes they've made in their system, there were changes that we needed to make in terms of how we interact with Primavera. Okay, we made the decision we're not going to have two different user interfaces and two different methods of interacting with Primavera. We're going to have one. Okay, so if they change it, we're going to support that. Okay, we still support the older versions of Primavera, but we support the older versions of Primavera using the new method. That makes sense. Okay, so I just don't want people to be surprised, you know, if they put 11 on or 11.1 on, and they're still using Primavera 6.2. like I am, all of a sudden, you know, things are going to look different. Okay. And basically, the way it looks different, what's going to look different is that, in fact, let's see if I've got, yeah, I don't have it on here. On this machine, I don't have Primavera. But basically, what's going to look different in your drop-down when you're using Primavera, in this drop-down up here, you're going to see really just 3 choices now instead of all the different, I think we had 5 options before. And you're really going to have the ability to control what gets updated when you synchronize. So you can control when you do that update, your options are either update Primavera from hard dollar or update hard dollar from Primavera. Okay, that's basically it as your choices. Okay, now either one of those are going to lead to a dialog that allows you to choose what actually gets updated. The WBS and the activity durations, the resource costs, the as-built quantities, all those different things that right now really all go together. You know, when we do a synchronization with Primavera, we're taking all that stuff. You can go back to job properties and change your configuration, but now you can control that at the time you do the synchronization. So that allows you to, maybe I want to update my Primavera schedule with my items I've added in the CBS, but I don't want to update anything else. I want to leave everything else in Primavera alone. Okay, so there's some new flexibility there. The other thing is, because of the way Primavera, the Primavera client works now, you don't see the changes dynamically. Okay, so when you update, when you synchronize with Primavera, we make the changes in the Primavera schedule, but we can't automatically launch Primavera and take you to that project and show you the changes, okay, like we used to. Okay, so with this new version, we do the synchronization. It's up to you as a user to go open Primavera, open that project, and you'll see the changes at that point. Okay. If you leave the Primavera project open, and if you got a nice big screen or two screens, you know, you can have hard dollar on one screen and Primavera on the other. When we do the synchronization, you won't see the Primavera data change until you go into Primavera and hit the refresh button. Okay, Primavera doesn't automatically update stuff anymore. So that's true whether hard dollar is trying to update it or whether you're typing in there trying to update it. You got to hit the refresh button to really see anything change. Okay. And that's really a function of their web client. They're trying to make the web client and the Windows client have kind of the same user expectations. If you want to see something new in a web browser, what do? You hit the F5 button to refresh, right? So they've done the same thing in the client. Okay. So if you want to see, you know, there's no extra effort from hard dollar's perspective as far as getting the data into Primavera or bringing it back from Primavera into hard dollar. But now when you want to go see those changes in Primavera, you know, you've got to go control, open Primavera, go to the project, and take a look at it. Okay, and that's all in the help system, by the way. The help system has been updated. If we go into help, there's a what's new list, so we can see what's new in version 11. Okay, so if we go down into Primavera, there's quite a bit of stuff in there in terms of what that looks like now. Okay, so this is that dialog that I was talking about in terms of when you hit that synchronization button with Primavera, you get this opportunity to say, you know, I don't want to send over resource information yet, or I don't want to synchronize expenses or user-defined fields or tags. Okay, the WBS and activities always go because that's kind of the glue that goes back and forth. So, you know, basically everything I just said is in the help system if you want to reference it, even though we weren't able to run it here today. Any questions on that one, on the Primavera version 8?
Does it play better HD in like 6 versus 8, or will there be no difference? I mean, you know how sometimes versions from third parties, they don't, you know, my reference is Adobe, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the question was, does hard dollar play better with any particular version of Primavera? Mm-hmm. And really the answer is we do the same thing with version 6.2 or version 7 or version 8 of Primavera, so we don't really care what version of Primavera you're using. The same information goes back and forth. Same options are available for all of them.
Well, where I'm driving is, do we want to link on that home page that says upgrade to Primavera 8 if we function better in that version? And then there's like
I see where you're going.
A revenue stream on that too.
Yeah, I wouldn't go down that road because the upgrade process for Primavera is
just for usability.
And thanks everybody for attending. If you have any feedback, as always, product enhancements at harddollar.com. If you have any suggestions for future stuff, anything you'd like to see changed or added, product enhancements at harddollar.com. Thanks everybody. Good luck.
Thanks, Fred.
Good job.